Hello and good day. This is the Bible Bard. A bard is a storyteller who recites traditional texts associated with a particular oral tradition, and I'm here to recite and to amplify what the literature of the Bible says about who is God and who are human beings. Here's the place we are at today. In the early 16th century, about the 1500s, to the 19th century, about the 1800s, various church groups attempted to missionize the Native American Indians of Canada, the United States, and Central and South America. The driving force behind these early attempts was not what we call now Christian evangelism. The motivating force for many of these religious efforts was a historic error in Christian understanding of a biblical story. In 2 Kings 17, verse 6, the text summarizes the story of the deportation of the 10 northern tribes of Israel from their land to the Assyrian Empire. It says, quote, "In the 9th year of Hosea, 722 BCE, the king of Assyria, Shalmaneser II, took Samaria and carried Israel away unto Assyria and placed them in Hala and in Harbor on the river Gozan and in the cities of the Medes." End quote. Comment: the places mentioned are now in what is Iraq. According to religious tradition, 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel were part of the northern kingdom of Israel that were conquered and then deported from that land by the Assyrians and then resettled within the Assyrian Empire in the 8th century BCE. Since historical records seem to stop mentioning this group by name, their subsequent faith in the dispersion became a late medieval mystery. The story of the 10 lost tribes happened to be popular among European Christians during the time that indigenous peoples were discovered in the New World. Some Christians in Europe put forward a theory that these indigenous peoples, the Native Americans of North and South America, were the descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The mystery of what happened to those tribes was solved. Comment: one of the many sources for this theory is a book called Jews in America, or Probabilities That the Americans Are of That Race by Thomas Thorogood, and another source is The Friar and the Maya, Iago de Landa, and the Account of the Things of Yucatan by Matthew Riestall, and others. Links are found in the transcripts, which you can get from www.biblebard.org. Why would it matter whether the American Indians were Jews from the 10 tribes exiled from the land of Israel and deported and resettled in northern Mesopotamia? The European Christians produced two vastly different responses to this idea. If the American Indians were Jews that God punished for their idolatry by deporting them from their promised land, and then because they were under God's curse, it was permissible to enslave, kill, or rob them. However, if the indigenous people of America were Jews who had drifted to the Americas after their deportation to Assyria, and they were to come to accept their punishment and turn to Christ, becoming Christians, then Jesus Christ would return to the earth from heaven and begin his 1,000-year reign on earth. In the second view, these Indians were the key to the return of Christ to earth from heaven. So see two views. One view: enslave, kill, and rob the American Indians. The second view: convert them to Christianity and usher in paradise on earth. These two responses to the idea that the American Indians were Jews from the 10 lost tribes were very different for the following reasons. Number one, the theory provided a justification for European political and military powers to ravage the Indians, searching for gold and other riches. Initial contacts between European explorers like Christopher Columbus and conquistadors like Herman Cortez and the Indians brought diseases like smallpox to native population. Places like in the Aztec capital in what is now Mexico City, 90% of the population died. When the Europeans saw the devastation, some attributed it to God's curse that they thought had fallen on the Indians for their Jewish unbelief and paganism. However, there's another theory, and that is that the Indians were the Jews of the 10 lost tribes, and this led other Europeans to various missionization efforts from a number of Christian denominations who thought that if the Indians were converted, the missionizers would bring Christ back from heaven. This great idea was not biblical. It's extra biblical. The text of the Bible does not support it. Nevertheless, since the common European did not read or own a Bible, this idea that the American Indians were Jews from the 10 lost tribes seemed to make sense. Discussion. The Bible Bard looks to the text of the Bible for information about who God is and what he wants, and who human beings, both to God and to others, should be. Remember, the Bible is two things. It is a holy book when it reveals things about God that we could not otherwise know, and it is literature when it tells the story of humanity. As time passed and evidence accumulated and more was learned about the indigenous cultures of America, the idea that these people were Jews from the lost 10 tribes lost credibility. With the rise of archaeology and the expansion of history about the empires and practices of the Middle East, we know that the 10 lost tribes were never lost. In fact, by order of Cyrus II the Great in 539 BCE, the Assyrian Jews returned to their homeland, and later Darius I, 520 to 519 BCE, allowed them to rebuild their holy temple. See the books of the Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah, for contemporary history of these events. What the Bible Bard can say about these missionary efforts was that most of them were contemptible. The Catholic mission of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits in Canada, U.S., Paraguay, the Order of Friars Minor, the Franciscans in Mexico, California, and Peru, Bolivia, and the Order of Preachers, the Dominicans in the Caribbean, Central America and South America, as well as the Order of St. Augustine in Mexico, Peru, Colombia, used methods that often included violence, enslavement, resettlement, and the imposition of European cultural practices as if these were a required aspect of Christian conversion. The Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts by the Church of England wasn't much better in their work among the indigenous peoples of the British colonies. The Moravian Church missionized in the eastern United States, Greenland, and the Caribbean among the Lenape, the Delaware, and Mohican tribes. The Company for Propagation of the Gospel in New England by the Puritans had a mixed message, sometimes treating the indigenous peoples with respect, like the Puritan John Eliot, who translated the Bible into the Algonquin language, and sometimes acting like other missionaries who saw the Indians as savages to exploit or even convert by force. Comment, see The Life of John Eliot by Nehemiah Adams, 1847, especially chapters 3 to 5, and also Evan Jones, a Baptist missionary about 1788 to 1872, who translated the Bible into Cherokee. He opposed Andrew Jackson's Indian removal policy and slavery. In solidarity with the Cherokee, he walked the Trail of Tears with them during their forcible relocation from North Carolina to Oklahoma. So you can see the difference in how various missionary attempts were handled. Summary. Christian groups, including the Puritans, Catholics, Presbyterians, Methodists, Anglicans, and Baptists, sent missionaries to the Americas to convert the indigenous people, whether or not they believed in the lost tribe theory. Upon review, it seems that the missionaries whose primary missionization effort was translating the New Testament or other parts of the Bible into the languages of the indigenous people, these attempts were more aligned with Christian principles than others, so that they often held the people they missionized in high regard and treated them with kindness and respect. Other missionary efforts that used intimidation and force to create converts seem to have missed the entire concept of new Christianity. The Bible Bard has not seen in the text of the Bible any occasion or reference permitting the forced conversion of anyone to the Bible's view of God or humanity. I've read it cover to cover, every word over 60 times, and I haven't seen it. However, it is true that various denominations of Christianity have, like Islam, used force to create converts to their religion. The history of the missionization of the indigenous peoples of the New World is an illustration of what happened when people ignorant of the Bible's teachings use religion to justify the oppression of subject peoples. The Bible makes the following pronouncements about missionization. In Matthew 28:18, the text says, quote, "Then Jesus came to them and said, 'All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations.'" In Mark 16:15, Jesus is speaking again and says, quote, "He said to them, 'Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation.'" In Luke 24:46, Jesus is speaking. He says, quote, "He told them, 'This is what is written. The Messiah will suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and repentance for the forgiveness of sins will be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem.'" Finally, in Acts 1:8, the text says, quote, Jesus is speaking, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." Making disciples, preaching, and witnessing to one's own biblical faith are not violent acts. Only people who do not know what the Bible teaches about God can think to use biblical texts to justify the forcible conversion of anyone to a religion. The whole idea of New Testament missionization is explaining to anyone willing to listen who God is and encouraging them to place their personal faith in the God of the Bible and the person of Jesus Christ. The New Testament example of missionization does not have a missionary beating people to make them accept the message or any kind of excessive authority. The true gospel is never preached under the threat of guns and bayonets. Witnesses only explain what they personally have experienced. They cannot compel others to have the same experience. What is it about Christian missionization that so offends some people? Some may associate Christian missionization with the historical instances of coercion, colonialism, or cultural imposition, as discussed in this podcast. Another possibility is that hearing the Christian message makes people feel as though their current religion or worldview is under attack. The suggestion that one is lacking something, especially in a spiritual sense, may be perceived as condescending or intrusive by the offended. True Christian missionization is an act of sharing information according to the text I just read. It is sharing information so objections stems from the objector's own personal problem, maybe in you and not in the message. Conclusion: this is the way the Bible Bard works. Brief recitations are closely focused, no distractions, no rabbit trails. The Bible Bard presents what the Bible teaches about a topic. I'm not trying to convert you to a religion. The Bible Bard podcast is informational. We're talking about what the literature of the Bible actually states, the ideas and concepts it presents, because most people have never engaged with biblical thought. Make up your own mind whether you agree or disagree with the Bible's pronouncements. You can support the Bible Bard podcast on Patreon for as little as $1 a week or $5 a month, which helps cover the costs of the podcast. You can also give at GoFundMe. The Bible Bard himself takes no salary and does not financially benefit from the gifts of supporters to the ministry. Send the Bible Bard any question or remarks you care to offer to BibleBardUS@gmail.com. And if you download the transcript of this podcast from www.biblebard.org, you can see a list and links to all the platforms where the Bible Bard podcast is hosted. Until next time, this is the Bible Bard.